I'm here to see how passionate people are. So I'm going to go over here and see how passionate she is.
Well, I have a test tomorrow. I really need to study all night. Check the tube. Got that. I think I'll just sit here tonight.
Alright.
All right, let's get that screen pass. Okay, Todd Gurley. All right, get off the block. Let's go. Let's go. Oh, I'm gone. Oh, I'm gone. Oh, I'm gone. Guys. Oh, I'm out of here. Touchdown.
Oh, okay, so those are very different things of passion. So, what type of passion do you have for God?
So, for the last 3 weeks, we've been learning from the life of King David about what it means to be a person after God's heart. And we've seen that a person after God's heart is a person of community, a person of trust, a person of repentance. And tonight we're going to see what it means to be a person of passion. And David modeled that very well. It is pretty easy to observe that some of us are more expressive than others of us. We can be expressive with our words, with our gestures, facial expressions, body language, all of that. Some of us have the gift of exaggeration. It's not a spiritual gift, but that could be used for telling stories or using humor that can brighten someone's day, or that gift could be used for deception. Some of us have a tendency to over-exaggerate our emotions. When we're up, everybody knows it because the sky is clear and bright and the birds are singing this symphony and just life is phenomenal. But when we're down, look out. Everybody knows that too. Woe is me, my life is falling apart. Others of us tend not to be very expressive at all. And that doesn't mean we don't feel things, it's just that those feelings don't get translated from the inside to the outside where others can benefit or not in sharing in those feelings. On that spectrum of expressiveness, I would say I'm kind of near the middle, but toward the side of being less expressive. My natural tendency is way further down towards the end, but I've worked hard over the years at being more expressive than I think I should be to help kind of bring me towards what most people would consider the middle for that. So as we approach our topic tonight, let me be clear. Passion is not the same as expressiveness. Passion is not the same as expressiveness. And I've got a comma there because we're going to come back to this thought and complete it later on tonight. So though expressiveness can be a valuable ally to passion, tonight we want to focus on the heart and not just the sleeve. We want to develop the heart tonight. So if you're a reserved person by nature, this can apply to you just as much as it can apply to someone like Connie or James, who can be very expressive at times. So it can apply to all of us. So I think our opening skit makes a good point to grab our attention, but it has limitations. If you couldn't hear it in the back, basically the question, do I want my passion for God to look more like the video game players or like the studier who was falling asleep? And so it makes a good point, but it has limitations. Obviously, we don't want our pursuit of God to be just like people being passionate about a video game, up and down, very temporary, very dependent on the moment. But if we can get worked up about a video game or a live sport or a board game or Netflix series or school or work or politics or social justice or whatever, why wouldn't we or why don't we get more worked up about the King of Kings and Lord of Lords who loves us as his dear children? So now what can we learn from David, the son of Jesse, about passion and pursuing God's heart? We're going to look at 3 snapshots from David's life tonight that reveal his passion for God, and then we'll move into an application. Let's start with the most famous story from David's life. So snapshot 1 is fighting the giant. Everybody's probably heard this if you've heard anything about the Old Testament. David and Goliath. So we're going to look at 1 Samuel 17, verses 3 through 7. I'm going to read this in the Holman Christian Standard Bible because it actually uses American measuring units to make us relate to the numbers in here. It says, the Philistines were standing on one hill, and the Israelites were standing on another hill, with a ravine between them. Then a champion named Goliath from Gath came out from the Philistine camp. He was 9 feet 9 inches tall, wore a bronze helmet and bronze scale armor that weighed 125 pounds. By the way, if anyone's thinking about that spring break hiking trip, I was looking up how much do you pack in your backpack. What's recommended is 20% of your body weight. You don't want to go above that because that'd be kind of excessive for hiking for several days. So take your body weight, divide it by 5. That's the number you would want to carry on your back. I'll just let you compute that for a moment. Goliath carried around 125 pounds, like all the time, just between his chest piece and his helmet, not counting other things he was carrying. Verse 6, there was bronze armor on his shins, and a bronze sword was slung between his shoulders. His spear shaft was like a weaver's beam, and the iron point of his spear weighed 15 pounds. In addition, a shield bearer was walking in front of him. So the tip of his spear weighed 15 pounds. So imagine going down the road to Stardust, picking up the heaviest bowling ball you can find, and holding that at the end of a stick, or let alone trying to throw that overhand at somebody. That was his spear. Goliath was a big dude. Just for fun, we're going to get an idea of how big Goliath was. If you've been around his house for more than a couple years, you may have seen something like this before. We're going to start with Alina at 5 foot and a quarter inch. Quarter inch is very important. Next, we're going to look at Nate McCrary. He's a solid 6'1", not like excessively tall, but he's a big guy. He's more than a foot taller than Alina. But more than a foot taller than Nate is Andre the Giant. You probably remember from Princess Bride. A couple inches taller than him is Yao Ming, a basketball player. More than a foot taller than Yao Ming was the Guinness World Record holder for tallest person in modern medical history. Robert Wadlow, 8 foot 11 inches tall. And then Goliath was 9 foot 9 inches tall. So this is to scale of how tall Goliath was compared to other real people. It gives us an idea that he was a giant. So King Saul, we can leave that up for a second. King Saul was described as being head and shoulders above his fellow Israelites. David was not described as being tall at all. So, and Jews from 3,000 years ago weren't an especially tall people group. So David's height was probably about halfway between Alina and Nate. And then just bring that over to Goliath, and that would be very intimidating for anybody. So Goliath utters his challenge saying, "I defy the ranks of Israel today. Send me a man so we can fight each other." So 40 days in a row, every morning and every evening, Goliath stepped forward and issued his challenge to the Israelites. Man-to-man, one-on-one fight. The winning team takes everything, basically. And of course, no one on the Israeli side had the courage to step forward and face the giant. David's 3 oldest brothers were in the army, but David was still back at home watching the sheep at this point. And the army's been off to war for a long time, so Jesse, David's father, sends David with some supplies to go to the battle, bring supplies to his brothers, find out how they're doing. So this is the scene David shows up to. It's early morning. The Israel army is marching to their battle formation. They're shouting their battle cries. They're just whooping and hollering, today is the day. The Philistines, you're going down today. And then, David sees this big show of strength and the excitement. He thinks, this is going to be an epic battle. And then Goliath steps forward, ushers his usual defiance and his challenge, and everyone in the Israeli army screams like a little girl and runs around and cowers in panic. And David's thinking, really? This is what's been going on for the last 40 days? And he starts to get a little riled up inside. Goliath was, by mocking God's people, Goliath was mocking God. And that bothered David, and it riled him up. And nobody else was doing anything about it. So David's passion rises up and moves him to action. 1 Samuel 17, verses 44 and 45. David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with dagger, spear, and sword, but I come against you in the name of Yahweh of hosts, the God of Israel's armies. You have defied him. Today the Lord will hand you over to me. Today I'll strike you down, cut your head off, give the corpses of the Philistine camp to the birds of the sky and the creatures of the earth. Then all the world will know that Israel has a God. This whole assembly will know that it is not by sword or by spear that the Lord saves. For the battle is the Lord's. He will hand you over to us." And of course, David faces Goliath and he defeats Goliath. He kills the giant. But then the Philistines go back on their word. They didn't surrender like Goliath promised they would. But the Israeli army was encouraged by David's boldness, and they were emboldened to fight, and they won the battle that day. So let me ask you, you think David's passion for God suddenly appeared that day, or you think it's something that had been developing over time? Thanks. When someone within earshot says something that clearly defies the living God, does that rile me up inside? Does my passion start to rise to the surface, or do I not really notice it? So here's an observation from Snapshot 1. David's passion for God gave him courage in the face of opposition, which encouraged others. David's passion for God gave him courage in the face of opposition, which encouraged others. Gave him boldness that was contagious. So that was Snapshot 1. Now we're going to look at Snapshot 2, bringing the ark into Jerusalem. The reason why this event was so significant is because God had promised the Israelites that his presence would rest between the cherubim on the ark. The gold angels that are on top of the lid of the ark, God's presence would rest there. So the ark represented the physical presence of God. It's different from today under the new covenant, where God promises that every Christian has God's presence through the Holy Spirit in them 24/7. But if your only chance of being in God's presence was when you were near the ark, man, let's bring the ark back. Let's get that ark to Jerusalem. So the ark had been captured by the Philistines many years before. God caused all these plagues, tumors and rats, and the first city sent the ark to another city, and then the tumors and rats followed there, and they sent it to another city, and the Philistines were like, forget this, let's send it back to Israel. And they put it on a cart with a couple cows, and it made its way back to Israel. But it ends up at just some random guy's house. So a couple weeks ago, when we talked about being a person of trust, we saw there was a failed attempt at bringing the ark to Jerusalem. They didn't read the instructions. This guy named Uzzah thought the ark was going to tip over, so he put out his hand to steady it. But when he touched it, his face melted off like in Indiana Jones, or something like that. So with attempt number 2, this time they read the instructions, they did it properly, and when they had taken 6 steps in bringing the ark towards Jerusalem, they celebrated. Nobody's face melted off, so they sacrificed animals. They did this huge celebration with leaping and shouting, singing, and playing music. So 2 Samuel 6, verse 14 says, David was dancing with all his might before the Lord, wearing a linen ephod. An ephod was like a shirt or vest that usually only priests would wear, the Levite priests who were on duty. So they'd bring the ark to Jerusalem, put it in the tabernacle tent. They do more sacrifices to God. The whole assembly sings Psalm 105. David blesses the whole assembly in the name of Yahweh, gives them all a snack, and sends them home. So 2 Samuel 6, verses 20 and 22. It says, when David returned home to bless his household, Saul's daughter Michal, let me pause there. Remember, that's David's first wife. She was the daughter of Saul. But when David fled from Saul, Michal stayed back, and Saul actually gave her in marriage to a different husband. And then when David becomes king, he goes and gets Michal back, takes her away from her new husband, and so their relationship is complicated. So Michal came out to meet him, and super sarcastically, how the king of Israel has honored himself today, she said. He exposed himself today in the sight of the slave girls of his subjects like a vulgar person would expose himself. So, P.S., David was wearing a linen ephod. It doesn't say what else he was wearing. The parallel passage in 1 Chronicles 15 says he was wearing a robe or a cloak, which is more like an outer garment. So I don't know if he shed the cloak when he started dancing around. We don't know if he's out there in his t-shirt and undies, or just the ephod, or maybe Michal was talking about just because he let loose dancing, she didn't think that was fitting for a king, and she was kind of talking about it metaphorically like that. There's honestly not enough details for us to know which of those things it was, what she meant by that. Verse 21, David replied to Michal, I was dancing before the Lord, who chose me over your father and his whole family to appoint me ruler over the Lord's people Israel. I will celebrate before the Lord, and I will humble myself. Other translations say I'll become undignified or contemptible even more and humiliate myself. I'll be honored by the slave girls you spoke about. So obviously David was being very expressive in the celebration of bringing the ark back, but it wasn't an empty show. It wasn't for attention. His expression just spilled over from his passion for God. And the very presence of God was tangible again to Israel. God was with them symbolically through the ark. So David said He was dancing and celebrating before the Lord. No one else mattered in that moment. God was the audience. David was dancing like no one was looking. So here's an observation for snapshot 2. David's passion for God kept him from holding back because of what people might think, which liberated others to celebrate. David's passion for God kept him from holding back because of what other people might think, which liberated others to celebrate. Apparently liberated everyone else besides Michael. So, let's take a look at our third snapshot. Number 3 is appointing worshipers. Appointing worshipers. It's interesting that the day that snapshot 2 happened, that was the event that first prompted King David to have organized worship. He put together a team of Levites for the celebration of retrieving the ark, and they're singing and dancing, and it was amazing. And he thought, wow, this is so awesome. We need to do this all the time. So he hired this massive, full-time worship team. 1 Chronicles 25, verse 1 and verses 6 through 8. David and the officers of the army also set apart some of the sons of Asaph, Heman, and Jeduthun, something like that, who were to prophesy, accompanied by lyres, harps, and cymbals. This is the list of men who performed their service. Skip over the list down to verse 6. All these men were under their own father's authority. So there's those 3 guys, Asaph, Heman, and Jeduthun. They were under their authority for the music in the Lord's temple, with cymbals, harps, and lyres for the service of God's temple. And then Asaph, Jeduthun, and Heman were under the king's authority. They numbered 288, together with their relatives, who were all trained and skillful in music for the Lord. They cast lots for their duties, young and old alike, teacher as well as pupil. So I don't know if this was a 24/7 thing, but it was at least daily that this was going on. David developed an atmosphere of worship. It was like an IHOP room. That's International House of Prayer, not pancakes. Kind of like the Beacon, the little war room prayer house that we have behind the lighthouse that some of the girls live at. We're going to turn that into a place of prayer and worship to be used whenever. And it's so close to being finished. But that team of worshipers wasn't just a band. It wasn't just music. They prayed, they prophesied, they recited psalms like poetry. They sang psalms, they wrote psalms. Asaph, who was one of those 3 guys, is credited for writing 12 of the psalms that we have in our Bible. They had instruments, they had choirs, they were trained, they developed their skill. They praised, they thanked, they pleaded, they danced, they knelt, they feasted, they fasted. There are also other priests who were working in the same area, and they kind of filled the area with the aroma of incense and roasted meat and freshly baked bread every day. So it wasn't just singing. They incorporated all means possible to develop an ongoing worship experience, to draw people into God's presence and simply celebrate and glorify God. And just a little heads up, from 2 weeks from now is Thanksgiving week. And SBSU does not have class Wednesday through Friday, but we'll still meet for his house that Tuesday night. So if you can stick around long enough to be part of that, it's going to be a worship night, and it's going to be multifaceted, so it's not only centered around the music. Here's one of David's psalms that these 288 worshipers would have performed. We're going to listen to a hip-hop spoken word version of excerpts from Psalm 69.
Psalm 69.
It's good.
Passion for your house has consumed, and the insults of those who insult you sing about me. I keep praying to you, Lord, hoping this time you'll show me favor. And in your unfailing love, oh God, answer my prayer with your sure salvation. Rescue me from the mud, don't let me sink any deeper. Save me from those who hate me, and pull me from the deep waters. Don't let the floods overwhelm me, or the deep waters swallow me, or the pit of death devour me. Answer my prayers, oh Lord, for your unfailing love is wonderful. Take care of me, for your mercy is so plentiful. Don't hide from your servant, answer me quickly, for I am in deep trouble. Come and redeem me, free me from my enemies. Then I will praise God's name with singing. I will honor him with thanksgiving, for this will please the Lord more than sacrificing cattle, more than presenting a bull with its horns and hooves. The humble will see their God at work and be glad. Let all who seek God's help be encouraged. For the Lord hears the cries of the needy. He does not despise his imprisoned people. Praise him, O heaven and earth, and the seas and all that move in them. For God will save Jerusalem and rebuild the towns of Judah. His people will live there and settle in their own land. The descendants of those who obey him will inherit the land. Those who love him will live there in safety.
So the artist who did that goes by the name Propaganda. He's very good at expressing passion, as was King David. And I'm sure if the spoken word style what was the thing back in David's day, they probably would have incorporated it with Asaph and the rest of the worshipers there. So our observation for snapshot 3 is this. David's passion for God led him to order his life around worship, which led others to encounter God. David's passion for God led him to order his life around worship, which led others to encounter God. When Jesus came into the temple courts and he found it had turned into a marketplace, and there were dishonest, greedy merchants exchanging currency, they're selling things probably too high a price, they probably had dishonest weights in their bags. And the temple was supposed to be a place of worship and prayer. And Jesus got riled up. John says that he made a whip, like he braided a whip together and drove out all the merchants from the temple courts. He overturned their tables, dumped over their money bags, and just drove them all out. John 2:17 says this, then his disciples remembered this prophecy from the scriptures. Passion for God's house will consume me. Which happened to be Psalm 69:9, which was the first line of what we heard up with the spoken word video. So do you think this big reaction by the otherwise very peaceful teacher would have got people's attention, would have got people to think next time they show up to the Temple Mount and, oh man, all these tables are gone. Oh yeah, Jesus shoved them all out. Why am I here? Yeah, I'm here to worship God, not to put my attention on money, which is what it had become. So remember at the beginning I said that passion is not the same as expressiveness. So let's finish that thought. Passion is not the same as expressiveness, but if our passion isn't expressed, it can't benefit others. Passion is not the same as expressiveness, but if our passion isn't expressed, it can't benefit others. David acted on his passion for God in all three of these snapshots. And each time the action flowed out of his passion, it blessed many other people. So, okay, Troy, I get you're saying if I've got a passion for God, I should express that so it can bless other people. But what if I don't feel that passion right now? Or what if my passion's at a really low level? I'll tell you what Satan will do when we have thoughts like that. He'll put this thought in your head. Well, if I'm not feeling it, I don't want to be a hypocrite, so I'm just not going to do anything about it because it wouldn't be genuine. That is, I've had that temptation before, but that is a temptation straight out of the pit of hell. That is Satan trying to get us to not take steps toward God. For these 3 snapshots of David's life, it's not like a passion for God suddenly manifested itself out of thin air when it wasn't there before. When these opportunities arose, it called up the passion that David had already cultivated in his life. Passion for God is not based on our current feelings. It's cultivated over time through spiritual disciplines. Passion for God is not based on our current feelings. It's cultivated over time through spiritual disciplines. And spiritual disciplines are just habits and practices that we put in our lives to help us draw closer to God. When our emotions happen to line up, it doesn't feel like a discipline when we do those things. We love it. But when our feelings aren't especially high, then it's a discipline to do those things. It's like with athletics. When your body is conditioned, when you love the activity that you're doing, it doesn't feel like discipline to do it, to do that exercise. But we're not always loving it. There are days, even for athletes, when you just don't feel like exercising. But an athlete will do it anyway because they know the benefit of that exercise. Or if you're out of the habit of exercise completely, you're never going to feel like starting it. You're not going to feel like going to exercise. You'll only be persuaded to do it once you believe that the benefit will be worth it. So it's the same with our spiritual disciplines. There'll be times when it's easy and we love it. And there'll be times when it'll be work because we don't feel like it. If you aren't practicing any spiritual disciplines currently in your life, you're not going to feel like starting it. You're not going to feel like it. But if you desire a deeper, closer relationship with God, if you want to develop passion for God in your life, you'll choose to start or develop those habits, those disciplines. And that's not being a hypocrite, that's just having a goal. Our fall retreat speaker wrote a book about spiritual disciplines called The Path Toward Passion. And a few of us have gone through that book before. It goes through 9 specific disciplines. And those aren't the only disciplines we could do. Those are ones that Dean has found to be very helpful in his own life. Let me simplify the idea for you. We'll break it down into three basic relationship pieces. Like any relationship, our relationship with God will be strongest when we're communicating together, doing things together, and spending time together. Our relationship with God will be strongest when we're communicating together, doing things together, and spending time together. And really, anything on this board, anything that we could consider in one of those 3 categories, we could consider that a spiritual discipline. So, we don't have to, Dean's book goes through 9 of those. Our discipleship book that we go through with his house goes through a number as well. But instead of giving you a big long list of, you need to do this, this, and this, and this, I want to challenge you to answer this question. What are some options that could get me on this board or bring it to the next level? what's a way that I can communicate with God? Me communicating with him communicating with me. And there's variations, lots of different ways we can approach that. It's probably going to involve God's word and prayer. And what are ways we could apply those other ones as well? To spend time with God, to do something with God. You may know several options of spiritual disciplines, but maybe you haven't been practicing them. Or maybe you're doing great right now spiritually. You're doing things that connects you with God. That is awesome. Keep doing those things that connect you with God. Maybe, honestly, you're not sure how to get started, and or what your next step may be. If so, talk with one of our staff or talk with a member of the prayer team about that to get you going in the right direction. We are off. There are times when we get out of sync with God because we're not pursuing him, or we're not finding the right combination that we need at the time, but we know how to get back on track. And sometimes we just need to remind ourselves and apply that. But if you find yourself in that place, you can come talk to any of us, and we can encourage you, because we've experienced that. We've gotten off track and then sought God and gotten back on track. So the attitude that will make the difference in spiritual disciplines, it's not doing them because we should, but because we want to be closer to Jesus. The attitude that will make the difference in spiritual disciplines is not doing them because we should, but because we want to be closer to Jesus. What is your next step in that? Developing habits that will connect you with God. David was a person of great passion. That passion didn't just suddenly show up one day. It was cultivated throughout his life in studying God's law, in praying and fasting and worshiping and journaling, spending time with God out in the pasture, etc., etc. David had developed those throughout his lifetime. So whether you came here tonight in a great spot spiritually, or not so great a spot, I pray that you'll pursue God through the ups and downs to become a person of passion after God's heart. Let me pray.